Hey YouTubers, and welcome back to the fourth entry in our Saw Retrospective series. I've seen a lot of people in the comment sections over the last couple of weeks. Really, you guys have wanted this. I'm so glad to bring it to you right now. Me and Jacob have watched Jigsaw. We've rewatched Jigsaw. We watched it with the commentary. We watched the documentary that they put on the home release, and we really feel like at this point, we're ready to bring this discussion to you guys. Jacob, why don't you say hello to everyone listening?
Well, hello, gang. It's good to be back. I'm glad to wrap up this retrospective series. I do want to apologize to some of the viewers. We were planning on scheduling doing this review and retrospective the weekend of the Jigsaw release, but unfortunately, I ended up getting sick. Dang flu bug's been going around. Right now, I'm sitting in Missouri, and we got a huge ice storm going on right now, so everybody's been getting sick lately, and my voice is just too raspy, so luckily, I'm feeling a lot better, but if anybody hears like a few sniffles as I talk or stuff like that, I do apologize. It's just me getting over this sickness. So, but I'm very excited and I'm very capable, and I don't want to keep anybody waiting any longer. And let's get this show on the road.
That's great. So, I think we're going to get started with our very first thing, and that is so we're going to be doing basically the announcement phase, and we're going to go through this kind of walk through the production, pre-production, production, the release schedule, marketing, all of this stuff. I thought it would be perfect to start with the announcement. You know, how long ago did this happen? How long ago were we waiting for the reintroduction of the Saw franchise into the general market of our film-based knowledge and needs, you know, the horror movie genre. You know, you and I were talking about this, and I told you, as much as we've also talked about on this channel before, the idea of the Comic-Con, where I think you said it was Dan Hefner, and I believe Mark Berg was also there talking about bringing the series back in a couple years, back in 2014. I believe the CEO of Lionsgate, his name escapes me at this point, was talking around 2013 at the New York Stock Exchange, talking about the future of Lionsgate, and saying, kind of in a broad strokes way, that Lionsgate has a lot of prospects in the future. At this time, they had just recently purchased Summit Entertainment for $400 million, saying that they not only did they have the Hunger Games, they also had Twilight, which was then ended, and they wanted to probably bring it back sometime in the near future. And also the Jigsaw franchise. You know, the Saw franchise was a big hit for them in the early days, and they knew at some point, because horror franchises never die, that was something that they were looking in the future to bring back. And of course, this wasn't a lot of shock for a lot of us fans. You cannot keep a good horror franchise down, and even back in the day, at the time Saw 3D was out, we had Tobin Bell at that point saying, yeah, it's ending right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if they brought it back in 5 years. So we were all anticipating 2015 release. Of course, that isn't what we got, but what else did you see out there that was in the ether when we were starting to learn more and more about this film, man?
Well, you know, I was just casually passing by and making sure that, you know, if Saw was ever going to come back, you know, it had to be for the right reasons. Like, I kind of agree with what the producers were saying when they were starting promoting this video now. I'm like, don't just make Saw, like, what would they do differently? And there's interviews not just by the producers, but there were also cast mates and stuff like that. I remember we talked about before we go on air, James and Lee were interviewed one time about whether or not they would bring Saw back, and both of them said, you know, Lee and I both have little to do with this franchise, but if we were to come back, you know, we want to make it different, make a big splash, and do things our way and stuff like that. And it wasn't just them. There was also Tobin Bell was asked, you know, ideas of what he would like to see, and he said he was on board. But I was also reading rumors, you know, if they were going to reboot the franchise. I even saw one article, I don't know if you saw the same article or not, but it was on movieweb.com where someone suggested the rumor if they were going to reboot the Jigsaw franchise, or Saw franchise, they would recast Tobin Bell. The person playing Jigsaw would be Bryan Cranston. Which I thought for myself, if Bryan Cranston's going to play Jigsaw, I thought that could work. That could work, but probably had to wait another 5 or 6 years so they consider rebooting it. But like you said, you can't keep a good horror franchise down. So, you know, I wasn't surprised that there was talks of them bringing it back. I mean, especially us diehard fans, the sour taste Saw 3D left us in. You always knew coming back oh, you gotta give us more. You gotta give us more. Come on now. But I'm glad that things went the way they did, and it was good to see the actors. They didn't forget, and then we gotta mention this as well. The entire 10th anniversary of Saw was released in 2014 as well, and that's when rumblings were starting to come around again. But I thought it was really cool that they released Saw 10 years later. I got a chance to go see it in the theater for the first time. I never got that experience to go see Saw in the theater, and it was really cool to go back and see Saw 1 in the original theater around that time. But I always knew going back to theaters, maybe in the next 5 or 6 years, I'm sure this series is going to get rebooted. And I'm glad that they went ahead and stuck with that decision. And I believe summer of 2016 is when we got that announcement.
Going back just briefly on the 10-year anniversary that we got in October, I believe, of 2014, like you said, the strange thing about that, and this is worth talking about as the last part of this retrospective series, at least for now, because I'm sure we're going to have something to go back on when we get Saw 9. And trust us, the idea of this conversation is that this isn't over. We'll get to that later, but it's not over. The reintroduction of Saw into the theaters was an interesting time in box office releases and just everything that kind of revolved around this. Around that time, 2012, 2013, and at the very tail end of 2014, we had the reemergence of releasing these really well-known, iconic movies in theaters. And I don't know how many people remember this, but they re-released in 3D even Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, Titanic. There was talks before Lucasfilms was bought out by Disney that they were going to re-release all of the Star Wars movies. Of course, we only got as far as The Phantom Menace re-released in 3D, and then kind of Disney put a stop to that. Saw was a part of that re-emergence of re-releasing movies that have been out for a really long time. Now, of course, in the earlier days of movie entertainment, where they didn't have this at-home, easily accessible home release on digital platforms and all these other mediums in which we could watch these films. The interesting thing about that is, even after that happened, Steam even got a partnership with Lionsgate to put out a lot of their films to buy on the Steam platform, including all 7 Saw films, probably a year or so later in 2015. But when Saw was re-released, even though I got to see it and I really enjoyed it because you got a nice little commemorative plaque, or it wasn't a plaque, but kind of a brochure thing. It was kind of nice. It did so bad in its opening weekend. I think it only managed to make like $1 million, $2 million, even less than that in its entire run. 2-week run, it didn't really go over well, and I think a lot of people were worried around that time who were fans, saying, is there steam left in this franchise, or is this film just so old and has gone so many different genres of horror at this point? At that, we had gone through Paranormal Activity, and the birth of the Insidious and Conjuring movies was just starting to happen by the time that movie was re-released. Genre moves really quickly, and the horror genre itself moves very quickly, and I'm sure a lot of people were worried that the torture porn, if that's what it must be known as, genre had kind of died out. Saw had its time, and with everyone kind of saying Jigsaw was coming back at that point, I know there was a lot of worried lips from the fans, like, oh, is this going to be okay? Like, are people going to embrace another Jigsaw film after we've gotten so far?
Yes, it barely made over $1 million, if not that. It may have made less, but it was good to see, all the actors and the cast and the producers all come back. Like, I know there's a YouTube video online. You go in, you can type in it and say Saw 10th anniversary Q&A, and it's good. They brought everybody back. They got Carrie Elways, they got James and Lee, they got Tobin, they got Shawnee, they got Dan Hefner, they got essentially all the main characters back, and it's good to see that camaraderie, even 10 years later. Even though we talked about, Carrie Elways didn't have quite fallen out with the producers over settlement dispute and Saw over the money he was owed, but it was just good to see him be a good sport and all the cast to come in, and it's good to see, even to this day, Costas Mandalore, Shawnee Smith, Mark Ralston, any of these past actors and characters will still go out to horror conventions and they will still talk to fans and they will still do Saw panels. Like even like this past year, Tobin and Costas both had a horror panel at some conventions, and even fans were asked about Saw, and they all want to make another one. It's good to see they're all on board to make another one, and it's good to see the fan base and they're still loyal with them, even though it didn't make enough money the 10th anniversary. But you can see there is still a fan base out there, and luckily enough, that's when we got the opportunity to go into summer 2016, and that's when we were introduced to the production news of Saw Legacy, is what they announced it as being announced.
And one thing we get to see, and we'll get to it later, is with the recently released documentary, that's what they were calling it. They were calling it Legacy throughout the entire production. That's neither here nor there, at least for right now. But like you said, in 2016, we got a lot of really interesting news. One of the things I want to talk about here is, I believe we got pretty early on the very fact that Josh Stolberg and Pete Campbell, they were working on the screenplay. And I think at that time, I was really excited about that prospect because I am a fan, you and I have talked about this before, of Sorority Row and Piranha 3D. I know a lot of people are. They're kind of horror comedy. Like, they're not incredibly serious. I think that's one of the things people were overly concerned about, is these two writers have more of a talent, or at least background in comedy writing. Good Luck Chuck, and obviously Piranha 3D was more comedy based than horror. This cannot be the way that we're going to get into the rebirth of Saw with these comedy writers, where they don't have as much, I guess, background in the horror genre as you might like. I think a lot of people at this point, especially considering the Comic-Con comments that we talked about earlier, were expecting them to throw a Hail Mary and somehow get Lee Winnell back or James Wan back, despite the overwhelming success that they had in their own careers with the Conjuring universe, with the Furious 7 that James Wan was doing, and Lee Winnell basically shepherding and taking over the Insidious franchise over the last 7 or 8 years now. Definitely too big to come back to this entity that they kind of created together. But the idea of bringing on Josh and Pete, at least in my opinion, from the get-go, was interesting. Trying to do something different than they had done previously, allowing a different voice to look at it. And personally, I think it really comes across in the final product. I think their humor and the way that they perceive horror really came across in a interesting, more original, kind of modern age sci-fi kind of Jigsaw that I think can shepherd the franchise into the future. But what were your initial thoughts on not just the writers, but also the Spierig brothers being announced in 2016?
Well, I was intrigued by the announcement of Josh and Pete. I was kind of bummed that, it wasn't anybody within the Saw family, because I always figured, you got to have the Saw family and the Saw crew. But then again, 6 or 7 years has gone by. They may have all moved on to different projects. And going back to James and Lee, sure, it's disappointing that they won't come back. But at the same time, they're going on to bigger and better things. James Wan at the time was doing Fast 7. That's a big movie for him. And then Lee Winnell was taking over the Insidious franchise. So it was a good opportunity for them to move on and branch out. As look what they are right now. Look where James Wan is now directing arguably one of the biggest DC character movies to come out, Aquaman. Mm-hmm. And then Lee Winnell's got his own horror movie coming out this year, I believe, which I'm looking forward to. Mm-hmm. And, so it's good to see them move on and move forward and progress. And in a way, it's kind of it's like watching your kids grow up. And kind of weird, because you can see them start off with a small project, and then 10 or 15 years later, you seeing them make bigger and greater things. So in a way, that's kind of an unusual metaphor. But like I said, it's kind of like watching your kids grow up. Like, you see these kids start this show right here, and then boom, watch them go to bigger and better things. And I'm really proud that they got to move on and do that. But going back to your question about Josh and Pete, I never seen Sorority Row or nothing like that. I did watch Piranha 3D and Good Luck Chuck, Wasn't a fan of Good Luck Chuck, but then again, I'm not a fan of Dan Cook. That's just my opinion. But or Jessica Alba for that matter. But it was what it was. But someone brought up a good point, and I think it was Marcus Dunson who made this good point on one of the Saw commentaries. I forget which movie it was, but he said, and I can't stress this enough. It's a good quote for any writer out there. If you want to come in and act seriously and do something seriously, do a comedy. If you want to come in and just have fun and write and go cut loose, do a horror movie. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, that's total opposites. Why would you act that way? But if you really think about it, it makes sense. Because if you want comedy to work, comedy's all about timing. And you got to have the right timing and right characters and right delivery and stuff like that. So you got to take that very seriously in order for your comedy to work. Where if you're doing horror, then you can just cut loose and have fun and have cliches, and you can just write yourself around certain things. So I think comedy writers can be good horror writers. And at the same time, look what Marcus and Patrick were writing for. There were some opportunities they got a chance to write for 2.5 Men or some other comedies for Lionsgate. And same thing with Josh and Pete, which found out in the commentary that I think Pete was writing an episode of one of Mark Berg's comedy shows, and that's how they kind of knew each other. So that's how they first got introduced. So for this role, as far as the Spirit Brothers concerned, I really did like Predestination a lot. I think it's a really great time travel movie. So based from a directing standpoint, I can flat out see these guys coming in and doing a Saw movie, and with the whole cinematography and stuff like that. And one person that we probably need to touch on too, he was praising up in the commentary, Ben Nutt. Ben Nutt is the director of photography, and he did a really good job with Predestination, the cinematography in that movie, and I thought that was really well done. So when I heard he was also attached with it, I mean, sure, you miss Dan Heffner, not Dan Heffner, but it's David Armstrong as the guy, cinematography and stuff like that for Saw, because if you knew he's gone, there's a chance there goes away that old school Saw feeling of color schemes and stuff like that, and the way style and the fast camera cuts and the position, the camera movements. You knew that style was gone, and we were going to go with a new direction. But at the same time, we've been talking about, it's this franchise that's been gone for 7 years right now. It's good to do something new and do something different. So I was looking forward to see what these writers and directors were going to bring to the table.
Going off of the Spirit Brothers and your notes on them, I really do enjoy the Spirit Brothers' work. Daybreakers, I think, is one of the most underrated vampire movies of the last century, or at least of this century. And I think that Predestination itself is just an unspoken little masterpiece of filmmaking. It's just so small and individual, and also incredibly expansive and such an interesting world. It's one of those films where I wouldn't mind a sequel just to kind of explore it a little more, even though it obviously doesn't call for it. And I think that exploring that world just even a little bit more would feel a little bit repetitive, but it just is one of those things that makes me want more. And I have to say, my first big criticism here is I don't really know. I'm kind of glad, actually, that they're not going to be coming back. Recently they talked about, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but they recently talked about how they were essentially hired guns for this movie, which makes a whole lot of sense with the way that it was portrayed and put out there. I think they did great work. I haven't seen Winchester yet, which recently just dropped this past weekend, at least from the time we're recording this. I want to see that because that movie looks fantastic. I think the Spirit Brothers are very good directors in their own right, but I would really hope that whatever they do next, they have full control over, and they're willing and they're able to create the thing that they see within their vision. I think the one thing that was holding them back in this film is the very fact that this is, as they've said off and on interviews, in the DVD commentary documentary that they did and everything else, this is a pre-existing franchise with a tone, a texture, a feel that I think they could only manipulate so much. Like you said, They got rid of the color scheme, they got rid of the quick cuts and all this other stuff, but mostly it feels like a genuine Saw movie. It feels like it, even though they say not so much, they want it to not be Saw 8, it could easily be misconstrued or misinterpreted as Saw 8, not really Jigsaw. I don't think it's their fault. I just think that they have so much more talent to give if they have a little bit more creative control. And I would like to see them do original projects in the future instead of stuff like this. Of course, if you're going to hire people to shepherd in a franchise that has essentially been dead for the last 7 years, then really nobody else could have been better but the Spirit Brothers. They have a great work ethic. They're all about the mood, the texture. The documentary on the home release talked about how they decided to kind of outline the entire movie. They had drawings for every single shot that they wanted, and they wanted to get things done as accurately as possible, even though it might have taken a little bit longer on set. And personally, I think that really comes across in the finished product. I think it comes across in every single film that they've ever done, and I'm really happy that we got that. But the next movie around, I'm glad that they're not going to be a part of this, because I want someone who probably can get a little bit closer to the Saw franchise that we knew back in the old days. I know this is supposed to be its own thing, but I would really appreciate going a little bit back, at least when it comes to the visual tone of the film.
Well, like I said, it's good that they had like that stylistic choice, because you gotta separate yourself from the past Saw movies, and one way they did that was this style of choice of visually presenting the film to us. Like, we all know, okay, now this is now the 10 years later standpoint. These are now new characters, and I think it was a clever idea. They didn't even bother to do a single flashback to any of the previous characters. Now, they did have flashbacks in this film, and they actually did them differently, where they had, quick edits in the flashbacks. That's when it did their flashbacks, but they didn't go back in time and change the color scheme. You didn't have that grimy green color filter or the blue filter that we're used to in the previous films. But then again, like I said, they did something different, and at the same time, I could see the complaints that people had. This doesn't look like Saw. This looks like an episode of Criminal Minds and stuff like that. And I could, to an extent, yeah, I could see that, the way it was presented, and it kind of was off-putting at times, where it takes me a while to get used to these characters and way visually it's being presented as a Saw film. And even like they said in the commentary, there's a lot more outdoor daylight scenes than any of the Saw movies, combined. This film right here probably has a lot more outdoor exterior shots than the entire Saw franchise combined. Saw's usually been contained and stuff like that in small environment. This one, we're introduced to the world that's going around outside of Jigsaw's world, where he has a reputation now, which to me, I think that's clever, the way they did that. But then again, you as a fan, we're just so used to having things this way, but we just gotta accept the fact, this is a new direction, new directors, new writers, new take, and we're giving them a shot, and we're looking forward to see what they present next down our sequel, which I'm glad that we're getting. But sticking with our announcements, filming actually began for this movie in October, and I cannot remember in the years I've been following Saw just how secretive this project was. From the end of summer 2016 up to the first character announcements in January of 2017. And to me, that really had us, going, what's going on? Because normally we are used to, okay, announcements being announced in October, new Saw sequel announced in October, cast announced November, December, filming in January, trailer comes out in Comic-Con. That's been the formula. And with the occasional every 2 or 3 weeks, a new photo will be released, a new cast artwork will be done. This one didn't do that. They were really quiet. We didn't know who the cast were, and they filmed this and started filming in October of 2016 and finished in November of 2016, and no one really knew. We didn't get a whole lot of information on that. We barely knew what was going on, or who was still involved, or if the Spirit Brothers and Josh and Pete were just rumors. And I think that's really telling when this project came out.
I remember that myself. This is when I fairly first started to cover it on my channels. This idea that Lionsgate might be dropping the ball here. And I agree with you. It was really secretive. It felt a little bit different from past times when the Saw movies were coming out. At least then, we knew that we could expect one year to year to year. I mean, the whole concept since Saw 3 was, if it's Halloween, it must be Saw. It owned that time slot every single year, to the point where the fans didn't really have to wait and or care for any reveals. We wanted to go into it as blind as possible. We wanted to see the twist for the very first time, be shocked, get the traps for the very first time, everything. But this was a little different in my opinion. I really do think that they might have dropped the ball here, Stu. The movie was a success, but I wanted them to give us a little bit more indication that it was something that was actually happening. You know, I felt like the majority of the audience, the fan base of this franchise, didn't even realize that there was a Saw film until maybe like a week before it was introduced. I know they picked it up a lot in October, but you're talking about, what, a couple of TV spots, a trailer around that 2017 Comic-Con time. There wasn't a lot of time to get the word out, get people excited, and make us know that, yes, Jigsaw is in fact back this October. Get excited, go see it, relive your childhood in a way that, as we talked about in the last video we did, kind of similar to the whole resurgence of the Star Wars franchise, at least for horror fans, people who grew up in the last generation of what was horror when horror was at the very beginning of the 2000s. So I wish that they had been a little bit less on the nose and trying to keep everything secret. They could have given us posters. They could have given us casting announcements quicker and sooner. I mean, getting back to that, we didn't even hear that Laura Vandervoort and Hannah Emily Anderson were in the movie until January of 2017, I believe. And then they kind of kept us hanging for a very long time, only intermittently telling us who's in this movie, getting confirmations here and there that Charlie Clouser's back. I don't think that they did enough to say that Kevin Groiter was actually back editing. I don't even think they made that incredibly public, but I think that they should have, because as you said, you expect you expect the family back. You expect the people who have been working on it for so long to come back as a family to recreate this franchise and shepherd it back into existence. I even said this a couple days ago. It just doesn't feel like a Saw film unless you have Tobin, Clouser, and Groiter. The guys have been there since the very beginning, and that's one of the major ups for this movie. They just didn't really give that information to us very quickly. They didn't give us a reason to anticipate, and know that it was in the good hands that it's always been.
Well, it's one of those things too where they have to pay attention to see what the general audience is going to think, because it's one of those things where it's dang if you do, dang if you don't, because if they start promoting like crazy, all right, Saw 8's coming. Like, I was at a comic book convention at one of the panels, and this is just like a regular movie panel guy. Doug Walker's his name. I went to one of his comic panels at a Comic-Con, and he had like a panel called Movies That Everybody Disagree With You On. And one person sitting next to me, he brought up the Saw franchise, and I'm just curious to see, it's in the room, what 100 people thought with the Saw franchise, what the general opinion was. And there was like mixed opinions. Some people liked it. Some people were like, another Saw movie. We're tired of this. And then someone brought the fact that, hey, Saw 8's coming out next year. And half the audience is like, woo. The other half of the audience just like groans like, another Saw movie. Come on, really? So I think it's one of those things where if they were promoting it like crazy, some people would be tired of it, where you and I would be jumping up excited for it. But I guess at the same time, maybe this general audience is feeling like, we're tired of Saw. We don't need it anymore or nothing like that. But they just, one of those things where they just didn't know. It was at the point, like, going back, the reason why we bring up the Saw 10th anniversary, and that didn't do as well as what they hoped on the re-release. They may have had doubts in themselves, saying, okay, maybe this franchise may not quite be as big as it used to be, because, like you said, horror movies move in genres, and those genres don't typically last as long. Even people got tired of Paranormal Activity and all the found footage movies, because found footage was a phase, and right now I can't even recall when the next found footage movie is coming out. Is there any found footage movies coming out this year that you know of?
Not any big found footage movies. I agree. That subgenre lasted even less than half a decade. So I agree. Like there might have been some fall off from major hardcore fans to the general audience. The general audience doesn't really care. But I think that I want to kind of section this off. Like I want to take this conversation and kind of put it aside, because I think that this is better served for the box office discussion that we're going to have later on who was this movie for and did they actually make the movie for the right people, you know?
Right. So,
but I guess when we're talking about re-releases, I want to talk about more things like the trailers, the poster, and also the name change and some of the images that they put out there. I feel like the first thing we got, and I remember this rumor that was kind of knocking at my door early in the summer of 2017. Of course, at this time, we knew we had confirmation that the writers, Spierig brothers, most of the cast, the main cast at least, that was attached to be in the film. And I want to talk about more of the cast when we get into the movie, but I feel like around this time we were starting to have these rumors that they were changing the name from Saw Legacy to Jigsaw. And I remember the very first time it popped up was the MPAA list of movies that were coming out in 2017 had listed Saw Legacy, in fact, as Jigsaw, and there was this idea that okay, they're going to change the name, but it wasn't official yet, and I was just sitting here waiting for the name to be changed, to Jigsaw, in order to actually promote that and tell everyone that yes, it's being named Jigsaw, and we could start celebrating this fact. And we're going to start getting the poster and the trailer soon, because at that point we were very close to Comic-Con. And as we already said, when Dan Hafner was talking about it 3 or 4 years prior, he had said that we're going to bring it back at Comic-Con like we always had. And that was just a normal release schedule for them, like you said earlier, releasing the trailers at Comic-Con and building up anticipation and excitement, giving all the imagery and everything for the film before the October release date. And they kind of just went with that same old strategy, didn't they? They had their one trailer, they had the poster a couple days before that, and then they also did the TV spots and the imageries. What were your thoughts on the name change, the posters, and especially those clown posters where they were having the Billy makeup, the trailer, the TV spots, and the images, like all of it?
First of all, I'm glad they kind of changed the name from Saw Legacy to Jigsaw, and I think you and I point this out, joked about this in the last video. The reason why I'm glad they changed it from Saw Legacy or Saw 8 to Jigsaw, by doing that, it probably gave them an extra $5 to $10 million, because instead of saying, Saw 8, it's now Jigsaw. All right, so people, if a Jigsaw movie go, they'd be like, oh, I want to see Jigsaw instead of Saw 8. People's like, what, do I need to see the other Saw movies now? And by calling it straight up Jigsaw, it's got the feelings for the general audience, people to be like, okay, maybe I don't need to see Saw 1 through 7. Maybe I'll just go into this movie fresh. I don't have to see the other franchises. And for that name of the Jigsaw and promoting it around Jigsaw, the Jigsaw character, even the trailers, like, his name, you remember his words, like, his legacy and stuff like that, his voice, promoting around the Jigsaw character. Thought that was brilliantly done, because people want to see his Saw movies, they know the Jigsaw character now. And by straight up calling it Jigsaw, you have your audience hooked. It's like, is this going to be a prequel? Is this a sequel? Is this going to have Tobin Bell in a lot? It has us guessing and stuff like that. So rather than just being another Saw film or Saw 8, we have Jigsaw, and I think that got more people's attention. As far as the trailer goes, I like the trailer. I did like the fact that, looking back on it, it was kind of torture at the time. We only got one trailer, but I'm really glad we only got one trailer. Because by doing so, if they were to give us, more trailers, and you and I are probably watching them by a hawk, or towards the end we probably would just skip it, because I don't want to be spoiled, but we just got a one and done trailer, and that was it. And that trailer alone got you and I both hooked, and that's one of the reasons why I contacted you. It's how we first started contacting each other, and it got us both excited. And just how a simple 90-second trailer, how long it was, just got us both excited, and we were able to piece out story information just about that trailer. And it felt just like it was back in 2006, 2007 when I see those trailers for the first time. and I was hooked then. I was hooked now, and I'm still hooked to this franchise, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
When it comes to the trailer, the one thing I absolutely love, and I want them to continue, I wish they would have put it in the movie. And to the best of my knowledge, after seeing it as many times as I can't remember them putting the Just Running Scared or Running Scared song from the trailer in the actual movie. Now, that's not uncommon, but I was in love with that trailer because of that song. It was so perfectly placed because I'm part of the fan base who just feels like that. To me, just feels like the same type of song that Tobin Bell's John Kramer would actually listen to. I wanted to kind of dive into it. I listened to a lot of similar music around the same time, just trying to get excited for this. This eerily, I guess, scary but also uplifting type of song from around that time, like a similar time period. I was excited. I felt like the trailer perfectly displayed what the film was about without giving almost anything away. Gave us some characters, made it seem like this isn't your normal Saw film. You have John back, you have all the mystery surrounding everything, but you have Eleanor. Of course, we didn't know at the time that it was Eleanor's workshop room with all of those traps from previous movies that we had to speculate and look at. And of course, there's just so much going for that trailer. The bringing up John's grave, we didn't know what that was all about, but they were obviously curious as to whether or not John was still alive. I really think, as much as you want to say, okay, like changing it to Jigsaw probably made them an extra $5 to $10 million. I think that trailer did really well to sell people, because one of the things I really saw during all of this was we have people who are still interested, remember it as kids, remember it as all these other things, like now they have families or whatever. They go, okay, well, this was always like one of those ridiculous, every movie is all torture porn and everything, but there's these ridiculous twists, and you always wonder how this main guy, talking for people who don't know the movies, but it's like, how does this main guy always end up outsmarting everyone, especially now that he's been dead for 5 movies? And I think the main draw here was, what's the twist gonna be? Like, how is this all gonna play out? How is he still from beyond the grave is the way they sold it, kind of pulling the strings after 10 years of being dead, at least in the canon of the film and what they say in the trailer. So I think that sold a lot of people, just the blatant mystery of it all. Like, what are they going to do next? Got people out, and you gotta give it to them for that trailer and all the TV spots that sold that concept really heavily. The games are not over here, and we're going to get back into this world that's been dormant for the last 7 years. Get excited. It got me excited. I know it got everyone listening to this and has gotten this far that excited, and I really, really though wish that they had left it there. And like you said, they might have only had one trailer, but they had several TV spots that were somewhat spoilery, and they also had, at least to my annoyance, around the time, so many production stills, from the movie that started explaining things they didn't need to explain. I have to say, before I watched the movie, I didn't want to get wrapped up into this, and you were even telling me, through DMs or just our personal conversations, hey, do these images, talk about these images, what's the story behind these and all this other stuff. And I told you, it's like, no, I don't want to even look at them because it's giving too much away. It's giving away that this workshop room with all the traps is Eleanor's. And it just kind of makes me feel like she's just a red herring and she has nothing to do with any of this. So I have to start thinking beyond this. I have to kind of put myself in the mindset where I don't want to be spoiled on anything because I still am a fan. I want to relive that moment of not knowing what's going on, being unable to actually guess what's happening or the twist by the end of it. I don't want to go into it that much, and I really think they oversold it, and it's just so weird for a Saw film to give away so much from the movie stills as they're trying to promote the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And there, we got some stills, like even at the beginning, like going back to October, November 2016. That these photos were rumors when they weren't confirmed. But the first on quote unquote on set photos we got were John's grave photos, as well as pictures outside of the barn. Those are the only two photos we got, and we didn't know at the time, if they were fake, if they were real. And then by the time once the confirmation, the first photo release was the photo of Laura Vanderbilt in the grain trap all by herself. And then going on from there, we've got pictures of traps of, Halloran, Keith, Logan, Eleanor. And then, like I said, there was all these photos coming out, like in the month of September and October, where it got to the point where I couldn't, go to that sawfreaks.com anymore because everything was just going to be so spoilery and stuff like that. And looking back now, after I seen the movie, going back and looking at them now, when these were photos released late September or early October, I'm like, yeah, these photos were really spoilish, especially the two photos that gave it away. The one photo I think was the super, super spoilish is the photo of Logan holding a vial of John's blood with his ring on his finger. And then I think someone pointing to Fred, there's a ring finger on the fifth guy, Buckethead Trap guy. So everybody going back along, it's like, yep, that's one. So everybody knows, yep, that's Logan. That is Logan right there. So, but that photo right there, just flat out, if you were a Saw fan, you were paying attention as much as we have. If I would have gone back and saw that photo back in September, I'd have been ticked because I knew, okay, that means I know it's Logan. And one thing they did mention, I'll go ahead and mention this from the producer's commentary. They did say that, people were online looking and stuff like that, and even if you knew it was Logan, it was their job to get you to think, okay, yes, it is Logan, but we're going to try to throw you off to where you could make you buy somebody else, even though we present to you that, yes, it is Logan. But that's kind of the things right there. And this is why I was kind of glad, I kind of stopped looking at the photos right towards the end of September, and I was boycotting every time someone said Logan's reveal and stuff like that. There was one thing where I think the one I came to you about, was when I thought that John Core was in the movie based on a TV spot, and man, that looked like John Core so much, but it turns out it wasn't John Core.
That was because they were in that psychiatric ward. I wonder if that's what tipped people off, and that was just like a rumor started because that guy does look similar. I don't know his name off the top of my head, but that must have been what tipped people off or got the rumor started, because you were convincing. I was really shaking my head. I was like, I'm not sure whether or not that's actually him.
I was convinced because it looked like him. He had the same facial features. He had the beard, the goatee. I thought for sure it was John Core. And the reason why I thought it was John Core, because there was a character named Ryan. And there was a rumor with John Core being back in the movie, back in April and stuff like that. And it said character Ryan. There was a Ryan character confirmed in the movie. So I thought, yeah, that has to be John Core. And it makes sense with the story. Maybe Gordon would have just set that guy up, put him in a psych ward and stuff like that to hide his trail. Mm-hmm. So that made it, looking back, it's like, oh, that makes so much sense. Why would he be in a psych ward and stuff like that? But it was like, nope, it's not him. So I was like,
exactly. And you know what always kind of gets me, as we're talking about this, the production and the way that they were marketing this film, I think for any future movies, and I wish that they had done it from this, they had taken a page out of their book, and also Fox, who is, I think, made some really awesome headway with the Deadpool 2 marketing, where they're not really giving away the movie. They're not even showing anything about the movie over the last year or two, with Logan coming out and also the latest trailer that they put out, where they do something completely unrelated to the movie, but just to give you an idea that yes, Deadpool is returning to theaters. You should go and get excited for the sequel. You don't really have to see a whole lot. You just are excited about the titular character of the movie. That's not a strategy. That's not a strategy that's new to the Saw franchise. They did the somewhat similar thing with Saw 4 when that was coming out, where they went through every single film. They had Billy the Puppet talk to people on YouTube videos, actually telling us hey, first it was this, first it was this, first it was this. And it's 3 days worth of uploads and different kind of trailers really that they were putting out for the movie. First it was the bathroom, then it was the house. I can't really remember off the top of my head. They could have done something similar where they didn't really give us any information from the movie, no footage from the movie, but they took maybe the Billy puppet, maybe John Kramer himself, to, Tobin Bell, to do something. People know John Kramer, they know Tobin Bell's Jigsaw character. They know Billy the puppet. If you just reintroduce that, maybe during like a football game or something, wherever they're going to put it, they just have Billy the puppet kind of cut into whatever is going on and address the audience watching the football game or something. They did that somewhat for this marketing, but I don't think it was wide enough. I know it was the YouTube videos where he was coming in, he's like, "Hey YouTube," or "Hey Dead Central," "Hey Bloody Disgusting," like Pete readers or watchers or something. I'm here to tell you this. They did a little bit. I don't think they did enough, but at the same time, maybe you don't expect them, and I don't even expect them to spend a ton of money promoting this $10 million horror franchise that's in its 8th entry. Probably you don't get a lot of people interested that way. Maybe that's why you do the name change. That's maybe why you do all this other stuff. I just think that there might have been an easier way than putting stills out there or putting kind of spoiler heavy TV spots out there that gives people a little too much information when you've kept the pre-production so secret, and also you're part of a franchise that tries so heavily to get people with the twist at the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think another thing we got to keep in mind too, it's not 2006, 2008 anymore. It's 2017, 2018, and a lot has changed since then as far as marketing goes. Now we are in a lot more social media based things and stuff like that. To where, some of the things they start doing right now, they did a Jigsaw VR experience, they did a Jigsaw escape room. They try to do a lot of Snapchat filters and stuff like that. And I think the marketing nowadays is a lot harder in today's date because so many people nowadays are into social media and stuff like that. So you would think it'd be easy, but nowadays there's so many different platforms and stuff like that that you have to consider, like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, all these other social media platforms and stuff like that, where it would cost a lot more marketing wise to cover up and fill pages back than it used to in 2006, 2007. So that's another thing we can consider there. But all in all, as we close the marketing portion of this discussion, do we, as a Saw fan, do I want more? Absolutely. You can always want more, but at the same time, it's that fine line of, do you get just enough out there where you're left wanting more? Do we get the right amount, or do we not get enough? And looking back as a whole, I think they got just enough, barely, but just enough in my opinion.